Well, thank you for joining us, everybody. Before we kick off the conversation, I'd really like to try and set the scene. Despite record growth in users to many publishers, according to the recent Comscore figures, there's no escaping the fact that many on the sell side have faced turbulence over the last several years. That turbulence has been in the form of ITP that was introduced in 2017 from Safari. 2018 saw the introduction of the GDPR across Europe. Fast forward to today, and we've got Chrome restricting the third-party cookie in their browser within the next 2 years. And hopefully we also find ourselves on the tail end of a global pandemic. So I'd like to try and spend the time that we have talking about how publishers are innovating in the current climate, and more importantly, how we can keep the internet open, free, and ad-funded for the many rather than the few. So if I can ask each of you to briefly introduce yourself, where you work, what your role is, and the company that you work for, and how you kind of see the landscape at the moment. Michael, if we kick off with yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Hey, everybody. My name is Michael Mullaney. I'm the Senior Vice President of Global Digital Revenue at The Economist. So I look after all the ways that we make money from our clients around the products that we've got to sell, the way we sell them and take them to market, and then also the ad ops and revenue operations team.
Excellent. Karen?
Hi there. Yes, so thanks for asking me to join today. I'm Karen Eccles. I'm the Senior Director of Commercial Innovation at the Telegraph Media Group. And my team and I look after a program called Monetizing Reader First, where we essentially look at the flip in the Telegraph strategy from being an ad-first model to a subs-first model, and what that means for our commercial products and how we monetize data, and measurement as well.
Okay, excellent. Sherzod?
Hi, Paul. Hi, everybody. Thanks for inviting me today. I'm Sherzod. I work for Minute Media. I'm a VP of Commercial Operations. Who Minute Media is? Minute Media is leading media and technology brand focused on, offering our technology, our products to the publishers to give them peace of mind. And also we have multiple owned and operated brands, including Players Tribune, Mental Floss, 12 Up, 90 Min, so on and so forth. My role is mainly focusing around operations and programmatic revenues, programmatic strategies, and ad tech, and also kind of being a bridge between our development team and our commercial teams. So it's a bit wide area to cover.
Excellent. And Tina?
Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks, Paul, for inviting me. I'm Tina Lakhani. I'm head of ad tech at IAB UK. IAB UK are the trade body for digital advertising in the UK. So a slightly different position from everyone else in this room. We actually work with a number of the companies that are represented in this conversation. My role specifically is understanding what are some of the biggest challenges that ad tech are facing, or that are prevailing within like the programmatic landscape, and then kind of bringing the industry together to see how we can tackle and address them and what we need to do to move the conversation forward.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that, guys. So let's kick off. I think the recent climate, right, has really challenged the way that buyers review brand safety, contextual relevancy, some of the keywords that they block in their programmatic buys. Two very large news publishers on the call here, Economist and the Telegraph. Can you just maybe shed some light on some of the types of conversations that you guys have been having with the buyer side, and how buyers have actually started to readdress some of the block lists they've been deploying? I know, Michael, you and I have discussed this at length previously before. Can you just shed some context around how that's changed and how that's evolved with some of your buyer side clients?
Sure, yeah, you're right. We could probably spend the whole time just on this. And I think, this is not new as such. I think, COVID and the pandemic has changed it to a degree, but we've always tried to educate clients, and as news falls in and out of favor, doesn't it, with advertisers, and more often than not, they want to sort of block all news domains. And so at The Economist, we don't really play in that sort of daily news cycle where we're always trying to sort of talk about the latest deaths or thing that's happened in the world. So we've really gone out for the last multiple years, really, is to try to educate on the value of of the brand and the content in there. And we've had a lot of success in getting advertisers who would otherwise use block lists at a domain level or keyword level to really switch off and understand what we do differently, and how talking about coronavirus or any negative thing that's happening is not always a bad thing to have. I think what we're doing of late, as well as that education, is really trying to impress upon advertisers what can be done differently, and that not all content that talks about a negative topic is something that advertisers should avoid. So, of late, we started to work with things like IBM Watson and really think about the sentiment of the content on the page, and be able to sort of have advertisers understand that there's ways to write positively around content that would otherwise be fearful for them and that they might want to block. So I think it's a kind of journey, and it's a lot about educating the brands themselves and engaging them at point of conversation around the RFP, and then having the ad ops and the delivery teams really kind of work with their buyers, their agencies, their activation teams to really kind of troubleshoot and understand. It sounds like it's a kind of easy, clunky thing to do, and I think left to its own devices it can be. But I think by investing a lot more time and effort into it at the outset, and then as we kind of optimize campaigns, we've been able to see a lot of our advertisers really switch off those block lists and work with us across all our content.
Yeah, which is fantastic. And Karen, obviously you guys, you must have seen record growth in users over the last 6 months. How has some of the kind of dynamics around those block lists played out for the Telegraph, and what have you guys been doing from a commercial perspective to really educate the buy side on the value of news and contextual relevancy? Because to Michael's point, there are many studies that say that there is no negative connotation with brands against news, but there's a legacy perception of the buyers. There seems to be, for some reason.
There is, and it's interesting because I think the sort of block lists technology, which is it is important. It's important that brands can avoid certain keywords or stories that would be particularly toxic for them. So we feel as though that technology evolved to really sort of protect brands and police the OMP, but it's always been very different for quality publishers. For one thing, because we have human eyes on the content that we're publishing, but also because there is like you say, there is a value to journalism that is written by professionals and that subscribers are kind of paying to access, for example, and which is really engaged with. So I'm sure I'll talk later about metrics that matter, because I always do. But thinking about how our client team and agency team have worked on this subject particularly, we really used momentum of the Newsworks Back Don't Block campaign, which we thought was an excellent initiative. It was amazing. And so our client team sort of went out and talked to advertisers who were really supportive and open to those conversations, although a lot of them have got their own sort of global strategies and directives that they've got to navigate as well, so that they're not always able to to change rules on a local basis. Some clients didn't know what their agency's blocking strategy was, or they didn't realise that their agency would apply a generic block list if they hadn't had that conversation with them already. So kind of that was interesting. I think just to kind of plant those seeds and to try and encourage those conversations to start happening is a good thing. And then the agencies were very engaged with that conversation as well, but much more specifically about what we've been doing with our own brand safety measures. So we have taken some action with our brand safety supplier, where we looked at, if you just sort of applied a block list, a blunt tool block list to our inventory back in March, we would have been blocking about 80% of our inventory. Whereas what we did is create a COVID segment where we could differentiate between positive and negative context. That made a massive difference, because it meant that in April, for example, we went from blocking around 40% of content to 15%. And then in May, we saw our availability of impressions, kind of really open up. So, those kind of measures that were mentioned earlier are really, sort of important to make sure that sort of safe news is there and available for advertisers.
Absolutely. And Sherzod, I guess you guys have got a slightly different challenge, right? Lots of sport content, less about news, more on the ends, where you're driving a ton of user-generated interest and traffic, but maybe the ad opportunity hasn't been at the same level as it was pre-COVID. How are you guys kind of dealing with the dynamic of less sporting content to, I guess, report on, and navigating the advertising opportunities?
Yes, we're not a news publisher, as you just mentioned. We have multiple sports brands, but we also managed last couple of years through M&A quite successful sort of acquisitions in different categories. That we bought Mental Floss, for example, from Dennis, and we bought Fansided from Meredith, and we bought the Big Lead from Gannett, USA Today owners. And we did, we acquired Players Tribune, and so we diversified our sort of categories that we write content. Whereas some of our content is kind of in-house produced, but majority, especially around sports and football and US sports, that the content is generated by passionate fans that who just live and breathe with their sort of teams, and we kind of do heavily curate it and publish it to hundreds of millions of people. Now our challenge is slightly different. So not only owned and operated, but also we monetize close to 3,000 other sites that utilize our technologies, our video players, our widgets, or our content. That we also monetize those eyeballs that come into different platforms and publishers. The COVID and block lists and everything else, I think, applies for everybody. And we also sort of had to go and educate our sort of buying teams, and our global sales team sits all the way from Tokyo to like Brazil, US, multiple sites in the US, and so on and so forth in the UK as well. Education is the key process. So went through sort of showing them that, look, not every word mentioned the COVID-19 is a bad article.
Yeah.
So there are lots of sports personalities, there's lots of athletes who actually talk about their experiences, talk about the things that they're doing, they want to help to, or they want to give back to the community while it's difficult times. These are amazing articles. These are amazing piece of content. But blocking those content out for advertising is not necessarily very a good thing for the advertiser as well as for the sort of for the publisher. So yeah, we constantly work with our advertisers. We constantly work with our ad tech partners to offer what we call is safe environment. First and foremost, we have to be a trustworthy and safe environment for the advertiser to come in this day and age. So if we don't do that, then we can't be in this space. I think the challenge is very similar, but not the same. But I think fighting or overcoming this challenge we are doing pretty much the same as what Karen mentioned and the others mentioned here. Yeah,
perfect. Thank you for that, Sherzod. And Tina, from your side, I guess, because IAB, right, represents buy side and sell side, but a lot of publishers are members of the IAB, and it feels like it's one challenge after another at the moment. Where are you guys supporting them the most? Is it around identity? Is it the unnecessary block lists? Is it privacy regs with everything that's evolving in that space? It must be pretty busy for you guys at the moment.
It is really busy, and actually that is one of the things that we and I've come in to kind of really understand how we do better is understanding what our priorities are. But actually, I think this topic is so interesting. And as Michael said, I think it's one where we could spend the whole session talking about it, because especially when lockdown hit, this kind of made a really big part of my role. It was a really big focus for us, because we actually started work on this. As Michael mentioned, this coronavirus has kind of highlighted this issue, but it's been an issue that's existed for a long time. So we actually have a cross-industry working group. So it's representative of all sides of the industry and a number of other trade bodies, including Newsworks with their Back Don't Block, and ISBA for brands, IPA for agencies, AOP for publishers. And we've all been working together since last year to produce guidance on how to manage your brand safety strategy better in a way that makes the internet a more sustainable and the ad-funded internet a more sustainable business model for publishers. And so coronavirus has kind of really highlighted the issue, and it's really interesting to hear from the publishers on what they've been doing to reach out to advertisers and speak to them directly and get them to change their strategies. for us at IAB, so we worked with this cross-industry working group, and I think one of the large things that we've been focusing on is also bringing the voice of the content verification providers, because at the end of the day, you know, their opinion is, or rightfully so, they offer a technology that enables the blocking of content, but it's not the technology's responsibility to decide what's brand safe for a brand or not. It's not their responsibility to tell a advertiser that you shouldn't include this word on your block list or not. What we can do, however, is like educate them and inform them on other ways that you could be recognizing the context of a content outside of just using keyword blocking, because it is a really blunt technology. And so we had launched we called it our content verification guide that we launched earlier this year in January as part of that cross-industry working group. And then as coronavirus hit, we worked with all the trade bodies very closely to release more specific guidance on how you could be supporting publishers at the time of national crisis. And then another part that became really interesting to this conversation was actually the government's interest in this topic, because during coronavirus, news publishers are considered a fourth emergency service. So it's been really interesting to kind of have their support in driving this message to market, to drive that change amongst advertisers. And we've also been working with the content verification tools to look at data to see how those trends have changed over time. Karen, kind of really echoing what you had said around end of March to beginning April being the time when this issue really peaked in regards to coronavirus and keyword blocking. But then probably from mid-April, kind of seeing numbers go back down to what their usual levels were pre-coronavirus.
Perfect. So blunt block lists aside, identity. Yesterday, Apple announced that IDFA within their next iteration of iOS is going to become a little bit more restricted in regards to portability. That's coupled with the Chrome announcement that I referenced earlier. As three leading publishers, how do you guys look at identity? Because at the moment, the third-party cookie pretty much underpins the practice of programmatic buying and selling. If you look at most publishers today, the majority of their revenues is increasingly coming from programmatic transactions. Is this a journey that you guys are all on at the moment in regards to trying to figure out how you continue to segment your audiences and surface them in programmatic buy-side kind of environments? Michael, how does the Economist think about life post, the third-party cookie and IDFA potentially?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think this is definitely the time for us and every publisher really to be thinking about first-party data and identity. And for us, there's a real need for it. There's a lot of content out there that, maybe the simplest way to think about it is, for us, it's really around the way we think about data is that it's sort of akin to butter, right? I think I've read that and seen that mentioned a few times. That this need to have data to overlay and to use for your targeting purposes, and that everything works better with some layer of data. But for us, we think there's a need to have better first-party data in the market overall, and we're absolutely building out our kind of narrative and story around that. And so that I touched on the sentiment side of things. We really think that the data isn't just around capturing users and registrants and giving them a sort of blunt, deterministic kind of, when somebody sees 3 bits of content, 4 bits of content, they automatically get a registration or a paywall, and we capture data at that point. We're being a little bit more astute and clever around how we capture data and better understanding the value that users have and attribute to our content. And then from there, we can build out better audience segments. So I think overall, we've not been as reliant on third-party data as a lot of other publishers in the system. Fortunately, we have a good first-party data segments. We also have very premium content and contextual segments that we sell. And our programmatic revenues, as you know, and we've talked about in the past, tend to not be as big a percentage of our advertising revenue as a lot of other publishers. We rely heavily on direct, programmatic guaranteed. So I think we're probably, all that to say, we're probably a little bit more on the cautious side and conservative side. We know we need to do more with first-party data, and that, we want to work with the industry overall, but we also know that we've got to build out our own chops in this space. And so we work with Permitive as our DMP, and I think there's there's a lot more we can do in this space. And I'm always keen to sort of, I'd say we're probably slow, but we've got a lot more to come in this space over the sort of coming 6-12 months.
Perfect. And Karen, I know I've heard you speak quite articulately before about different ID solutions in play and potentially where the industry is going. Can you just maybe touch upon some of the conversations you guys are having at the Telegraph and how you view life post a third-party cookie?
Yeah, sure. I think for us, maybe similar to Michael, it's not we don't have the sort of high reliance on the OMP.
Yeah.
So we're calling a kind of cautious optimism about the decline of the third-party cookie and the sort of diminishing availability of third-party data in the market, because we don't think that it's delivered value that's deserved back to publishers. So similar to The Economist, more of our business is direct PG or, of course, increasingly ozone. So we've been on our journey with a registrations and then subs first strategy for 3 years now. So collecting logged in users and first party data. We spend very little on third party data now. It's more something we would use to augment a very specific campaign, looking for a kind of very niche audience, but generally we're not reliant on third-party data at all. We also work with Permitive, and what that's enabled us to do is just increase the scale of segments that we can activate on, so that the first-party data is there, it's as robust as ever. But what's important is that you can activate in kind of decent size segments. And then we're looking at, we'll be launching a sort of more advanced contextual targeting product in a few weeks' time, which will play on some of those kind of more sort of nuances in the technology that's available to us now, so that we can target based on tone and mood, as opposed to just sort of sticking those kind of classic gambling ads on the sports section.
Perfect. And I must say there are other DMPs available as well.
There are, yes, absolutely. But that happens to change. And our the Telegraph's DMP Telegraph brand is Adobe, which is very important to us, as thinking about sort of the Telegraph and what we do with our customers. But that type of DMP that's been built up for commercial publishers definitely makes a difference for activation too.
Thanks, Karen. That's really helpful. And Sherzod, I mean, do you see the same trend playing out? Because many are now asking, without third-party data still exists, but there's no escaping the fact that it's going to become increasingly difficult to build and validate privacy, etc. How do you see the open marketplace kind of evolving? Does it slowly go away if there's no third-party data to overlay on top of those impressions? I mean, how important is it to you guys versus the likes of PMP or PG bookings?
We are very different to what Karen and Michael described, and I wish we also had that kind of the users coming in to read The Economist or the Telegraph and so on and so forth. But we have a scale, right? So we have our video platform or video player generates 300 million plays a day. So in the US, for example, we are way above, leading sports publishers or broadcasters in terms of video views and so on and so forth. And also display and multiple sort of categories, multiple sort of owned and operated brands, as well as close to 3,000 other sites. That gives us two things, right? And one is we have to rely on programmatic worlds, and we are programmatic first. Our revenues, significant portions are generated from programmatic worlds. And the other thing also gives us a strength in a way that when the third-party cookies eventually will go. Now, iOS, we don't have any. Android, yes, on other browsers outside of Safari. We're seeing the CPM differences by almost 100%.
Yeah.
So iOS, we see $1 CPM, and Android, we see like $2.50, almost $3 CPM. I'm just making these CPMs up. I'm just showing the differences. It's a significant portion. Now, when we look at the the volume that ad inventory that we have, we almost have split 50-50 because of our global presence. We've got a huge LATAM presence, huge US, Southeast Asia with 3 different languages in there, and then all the 5 European major languages that we have content and sites and partnerships that exist. So it gives us strength in a way that we can put them into different categories, and we can sell them in like blocks of sites and environments and so on and so forth. But eventually, when the third-party cookie kind of disappears from when the Chrome brings this change, we're going to have to adapt in different ways. One of which will be relying on our technologies, right? So on our sort of diversified understanding of our user base. Having a wealth of data is one thing, being able to use it and utilizing your technology is another thing. I've integrated Crux, for example, in Northern Shell, a few years ago, 7-8 years ago. And once we did it, we were the first sort of partner for them, and in EU. We quickly realized when we start applying all these funnels of data targeting, we had a very small audience. Yeah. We couldn't even deliver small PMPs. So having this data and being able to deliver in a scale is a challenge.
Yeah,
it's a massive challenge. So hence we empathize and we actually invest quite a lot on our own technological sort of strength, and also building up our own database and categorizing our users in different categories and different sports channels and their frequency of coming to our sites and so on and so forth. That will give us strength when this cookie sort of expires. One day, third-party cookies will go.
Yeah.
But also, we actually using it now. So we're doing testing here, testing there to see how this PMP works. But in terms of split between our reliance on programmatic open markets versus direct sales, we work 18 to 19 different SSPs today and other sort of programmatic partnerships, which makes it quite sort of a complex environment to work with. But also our sales team, very strong sales team, goes out and sells, brings around 30 to 35% of our sort of revenues coming from direct. Now, they don't necessarily sell the same volume, but the margins that we see on a direct sales is very different to margins that we see on programmatic work. So the revenue in terms of the dollar sort of signs are sort of 30% to 70% to programmatic. But in terms of the scale and volume is in programmatic, and we do have a mountain to climb. Just so you know.
No, that's really helpful. Thanks for that context, Sherzod. So changing topics slightly, the recent ISBA and PwC reports tied back to what you said there, Sherzod, around working with 19 different sell-side players. For the last several years, the market, or the buy-side market, has been obsessed with supply path optimization, trying to streamline how they buy programmatic campaigns, build stronger relationships with their sell-side partners, and more importantly, stronger relationships with the origin of the impression, the publisher. Most people, when they speak about it, it's buyers speaking about SPO. How does that practice impact you guys? Have you seen conversations with your buyers change? So again, to your point, Sherzod, a buyer's coming to you saying, you know what, we don't necessarily want to try and find your inventory in 19 different SSPs and exchanges. We're trying to figure out if we can do a strategic partnership with, a handful. Is that something that you guys as publishers are actively involved in, or is the majority of that SPO being driven by the buy side with very little input from the sell side? Michael?
Yeah, sure. It's interesting. I think it's even a bit more basic than that. We because of some of the bid throttling that happens, we see PMPs that we set up with buyers not scale. They don't get the bid requests through. Yeah. And then so there's a lot more troubleshooting that's required, and so there's a lot more work that goes on than I first thought, and probably that needs to, between us as publishers, the agencies, and the sort of intermediaries, just to actually get something to work. I think that's the most fundamental thing, and we don't get as involved in the actual kind of supply path optimization proper, and where our inventory is appearing, and probably there is a need to consolidate down through SSPs and exchange partners, because I get it from a DSP perspective. If they're getting the same impression 50 times from different sources, then they need to rationalize.
Of course,
but we see it first and foremost at the scale of PMPs and programmatic deals, when they don't get off the ground because the bid throttling is happening on the SSP side.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I mean, I think Karen, you and I have touched upon this before. We've seen the trade desk recently, ask the sell side to try and consolidate the origin of the traffic that they're servicing back out to the trade desk bidder. And I think it makes a ton of sense, right? They don't want to see the same impression from 50 plus SSPs. Is that how do you kind of speak to your buyers about that? Kind of when you're doing those PG deals and some of those more programmatic direct negotiations, are you trying to just cherry pick now a handful of sell side players and saying, look, they're our strategic partners, or is it still pretty much up to the buy side as to where they access the Telegraph from?
No, this isn't directly my role. I have to say it's Paul de la Nigerie, who is my colleague who runs the tech team. But yes, kind of we think about it much more about, there's a small number of strategic partners. And we are interested in, over time, diminishing the amount of our inventory that's available in the OMP. So we would put more thought at the moment into how we are channeling buyers to Ozone, for example, because we think there's a real benefit for advertisers to think about that. And it answers, sort of partly this question and also the question about how you can buy across a range of quality publishers in the future without the use of cookies. How do you ensure that you've that sort of taxonomy that you're employing across the kind of Telegraph and the Times and the Guardian, or kind of any of the other publishers, has some uniformity. So strategically, that's much more our sort of area of focus.
Okay. That makes a ton of sense. And Tina, the IAB, right, one of the driving forces to try and streamline the practice of programmatic buying and selling in order to get more brand adoption. Can you just touch upon maybe some of the initiatives that IAB UK, IAB US, Tech Lab are kind of rolling out to try and make the ecosystem more transparent for those on the buy and sell sides?
Sure, yeah. So just to say, so we are, as IAB UK, we adopt the standards from IAB Tech Lab under our gold standard umbrella. But the initiatives that are directly related to helping increase the transparency come from IAB Tech Lab. And I'd say the ones that we focus most on increasing adoption within the UK are ads.txt. So I'm sure most people listening to this is familiar, like just making available and making it more transparent who are all the people that are legitimately selling inventory on behalf of a publisher. Then the kind of newer sellers.json initiative, which is essentially replicating that transparency at the SSP level. So, confirmation that the SSP is working with the publishers that are listed, who have listed them on their sites, and who else it is that they're working with. And then there's the supply chain object, which is you mentioned about the trade desk and them trying to consolidate the number of partners that their inventory is going through. And the supply chain object essentially brings that information into the open of these are the people that the impression has passed through, and therefore it's up to the buyer on whether they would still like to bid on that impression, or whether they would like to pass based on the information that then's provided. And I'd say that those are the three initiatives that we in the UK are kind of focusing on driving adoption on within our gold standard initiative, because we believe it kind of addresses some of these concerns that have been raised by the buy side.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, excellent. So it sounds like there are lots of initiatives that are getting adopted by publishers and buyers. Transparency is available if you ask the right questions and you're working with the right partners. Karen, to your point around the publisher alliances and some of the projects that have been driven by companies like Ozone, it sounds like more and more investment is going into that area, not just in the UK but globally as well, with publisher alliances. And the main USP for doing that as a publisher and kind of working with some of your competitive publishers, it's a data offering, right? Is that right?
I think it's in response to what advertisers are asking for us, and an awareness that now there is a lot of value in publisher logins and in our first party data. But there's a danger that by creating a lot of mini walled gardens, publishers will actually end up inadvertently driving more investment towards the platforms. So it's important that we talk about each other and we see each other as a peer group instead of competitors. And that what we can do by working together is to grow the size of the quality publisher market together, which is good for everybody. And hopefully sort of push back a little bit about, against all of that investment that's going into the platforms instead.
No, absolutely. Well, listen, thank you very much for that, guys. As we kind of wrap up the conversation, just maybe one or two words from each of you. Within the next 24 months, one topic that you think will change your business for the better. One area. Michael?
Oh.
You always ask me first, Paul. I was going to copy everyone else's answer. One topic, one area.
One area that you think's got the potential to be a game changer from a revenue perspective.
It's what we've been talking about. Frankly, it's first party data and audience and having that narrative and really kind of making that part of a conversation you have with clients that leads to how you help them achieve their business goals, their business outcomes, and showing them having transparent first party data available to advertisers. I think that's going to be the holy grail for a lot of premium publishers and really get us even higher up the food chain and into those kind of CMO conversations.
Completely agreed. Sherzod?
For us is because we are technology offering as well as having a owned and operated and network partners. The one topic will put us in a better position, I suppose, in the next 24 months is being able to take the publisher's pain away, offering them free video player, free VMS, free content sharing. In return, of course, there's a revenue shares, there's other commercial bits and bobs can be built. So taking away all those long-term contracts you can't get out, multi-million-dollar or tied up things in exchange of very easy-friendly user technology and monetization behind it. If we manage to do it in a large scale and in a better podiums, I suppose, then that will put us in a lot better position in the next 24 months than anything else that I can think of.
Perfect. Karen?
I think we've got, I'll say metrics that matter then. I agree with Michael on the first party data, but I think there's something unique about editorial partnerships, first party data partnerships, but then crucially us all proving to advertisers that works and it delivers results beyond the click.
Completely agree. Tina?
Well, I think it's really difficult to answer that from the IB perspective because essentially all of those are topics that will really be resolved or helped by collaboration, which is essentially what IAB enables and facilitates. But one I would say, for me, I think that I'm particularly excited for is user identity and just the changing landscape of identity. I think that it's offering us an opportunity to kind of build the internet and the future kind of advertising revenue model in a way that is more sustainable for the industry as a whole, but also puts the user first, which I think is going to be really exciting as a user of the internet, but also someone in this industry.
I completely agree. Listen, guys, I think we're up on time, but thank you very much for your time. Really informative discussion. If any viewers have any questions, please feel free to ping each of us on social channels or via email. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks, everyone.